best games deserve the best hardware, and there's no better gaming hardware than SteelSeries. Whether it's keyboard, mice, headsets, or gaming earbuds, SteelSeries kit is industry-leading and award-winning. Get 12% off any purchase over at steelseries.com by using offer code SKILLUP. Click below to check it out, or stick around to the end of the video to learn more. I know you clicked on this video wanting to hear about the making of Clair Obscur Expedition 33, and we will get to that. But first, I want to briefly tell you about the making of this video. The first time I heard about Clair Obscur Expedition 33, I didn't even know that I'd just been told about it. I was attending a Summer Games Fest in LA when I bumped into the now prolific and legendary Ben Starr. We were chatting about this and that, and I casually asked him, "So, what are you working on next?" And he suddenly got really serious, and he looks me dead in the eye, and he says,
"I can't tell you what it is, but I will say this. It's very, very special."
At this point, I'm pretty used to hearing cryptic clues from developers and voice talent, so I kind of put that out of my mind. Fast forward to the Xbox showcase a few days later, and all of a sudden, I'm listening to a very familiar voice.
Every year she paints again. And every year, an expedition departs for the continent with one hopeless mission. Destroy the paintress so she can never paint death again.
Clair Obscur Expedition 33 had just about as strong a reveal as you could hope for, and even from just the trailer, you could sense that there was a little something to this one, and gassed up by Ben's wild-eyed excitement, I was very pumped to eventually get my hands on it. I did so later than most. I was in Japan when Expedition 33 dropped. Though I had played a little of it before I hopped on the plane, what little I had played, which was basically up to the end of Act 1, told me that this was probably on its way to being a certified banger. It wasn't until I got home from Japan that I could finish the rest of the game, and I vividly recall that feeling as I rolled the credits. That feeling of just, oh my god. It was a feeling that was known to me because I remembered the last time I felt it, and it was when I'd finished Nier Automata for the first time, or fifth time really, but we won't get into that now. It was that feeling of being like washed up on a beach after a tidal wave of vision and originality and creativity had picked you up, carried you some distance, and then just totally dumped you out. You wake up on the beach all bedraggled and disoriented, and you look around for the wave like, no, come back. But that's not how these waves work, man. Stuff like this is a one-time ride, and then you just spend the next few years trying to chase that high. So I'd always planned to review Expedition 33, but after I'd felt all the things that I felt, I was like, okay, I gotta find out who these Sandfall people are. And that's when things got really crazy. Because when I started looking into it, I simply couldn't believe what I was reading. I'm sure you know some of that story already, like the fact that the writer, Jen Svedberg Yen, had never had a single word of her writing published before, and she was found via a Reddit post, or the fact that the game's composer, Lorien Testad, had never had any music published before, and was found not on SoundCloud as some had claimed, but on a tiny random music forum that Testad had never been to or posted on, and that the game's director, Guillaume Broche, had never been to or posted on, but owing to a random post that Testad made on a whim, these two found each other, and 8 hours of music later, here we are, with a soundtrack that is just as chart-topping as the game itself. So that's what you might have heard, but believe me when I tell you that that is not the half of it. Did you know this game's lead producer and the manager of the studio had never worked in game dev before and was working at the French equivalent of Uber before joining Sandfall? Did you know that the game's art director had also never worked in game dev and was working at an events management company before this? Did you know that this game's animator was found via his YouTube channel and he worked part-time on the game's animations before recruiting his animation buddies to work on this for a bit of fun on the side, and that none of them ever worked on this full-time? Did you know that most of the people at Sandfall are either graduates or incredibly early in their careers? Most of the people who made this video game, from the senior leadership all the way down, had never made a game before. How on earth do you then suddenly make one of the best games of the year, one of the best games of this generation, and one of the best JRPGs full stop, and it wasn't even made in Japan? Trying to answer these questions became an obsession for like 2 weeks. I read every article, I watched every interview, I scoured Twitter and Reddit and YouTube. I even went on LinkedIn. Ew. And at the end of all that, I still could not figure out how this group of people made this video game. So I did the only thing that I could do at that point. I asked them.
I'm Jennifer Sviaberian. I'm the lead writer and the voice and localization producer for Sandfall Interactive.
My name is Michel Nora, and I'm the lead game designer on Clair Obscur Expedition 33.
Hi, I'm Ben Starr, and I play Verso in Clair Obscur Expedition 33.
Hi, I'm Jennifer English, and I play Mael in Expedition 33.
I am Nicholas Maxon Frankham, and I'm art director for the game.
I'm Lorient Testard, the composer of Expedition 33.
Hi, I'm Tom Guillemin. I'm a co-founder of Zenless and also technical director on Expedition 33.
Hello, I'm Guillaume, and I'm the creative director on Expedition 33.
For the past 2 weeks, I've been interviewing several of the people who were instrumental in the creation of Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I couldn't speak to everyone, of course, since Sandfall is 32 people and 1 dog, plus they had outside support provided by their publisher and other partners, but the people I was fortunate enough to speak to did shine some light on that central question of how they managed to pull this off. And I frame it that way because I'm deliberately avoiding using the word answers. I think there's a temptation in a story like this to reach for the easy answers, the simple solution, the easily replicable process. They just did this, and if everyone else just did the same thing, then we'd be getting Expedition 33s every day of the week and twice on Sundays. And sure, there are plenty of things to be learned from Sandfall about how to make an incredible game with a bunch of new talent on a shoestring budget, but I don't think anyone can fully explain how all of this came together as well as it did. And you know who agrees with me? The game's director.
So, replicated, even if I had to replicate it, I don't even know if I could, just because, I told it many times, but the sheer amount of luck to bring together this incredible team, because a game is just its team, basically. That's it, nothing, no more, no less.
So we're never going to be able to fully explain how Clair Obscur Expedition 33 became such a remarkable experience, but we can go some distance. And funnily enough, the story of this breakout French video game studio begins in the very place that first comes to mind when you think of France and video games: Ubisoft. Ubisoft. It's not having a great run lately, but not too long ago, Ubisoft were riding rather high, redefining the open world template, launching some of the biggest new IP launches in video game history, while also leaving some room for the little stuff too. God bless you, Rayman. Hope to see you back in the mix real soon. It was in this thriving era that a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed Guillaume Broche joined the company. Having no formal training in video games, but with a desire to work in the industry, he joined as an intern based in Paris, where he was assisting the creative director on the Might and Magic franchise, back when Ubisoft were using their brand for more than just mobile games and NFT projects. I'm not joking, by the way, look it up. When that internship ended, he found himself working at Xbox in their marketing team, and that gave him a pretty clear picture of what he didn't want to do.
And it's at this point that I realized that I don't really want to do marketing, because it's not my thing. I just want to create some stuff. So it was just a realization that I don't just want to work in video games. I want to also do what I like when I work in video games, because if doing something that you don't want to do, even if it's still video game, it's not for me.
So Guillaume went back to Ubisoft, enlisting in their graduate program in the producer track. Producers are typically like project managers in the video game world, bringing some structure to the often chaotic process of game making. Initially, he was based in Paris, working on Ghost Recon Breakpoint, but in 2018, he found himself in Malmo, Sweden, working on The Division 2, and it's here that the story of Expedition 33 really begins, because two really important things happened. The first is that Guillaume got a taste for Unreal Engine.
One night, I just started Unreal Engine just to learn and have fun with it, and I got completely addicted, to a point that was very, very toxic for my health. I was basically working 8 hours per night, after my day job, just because I couldn't let go. It was I can do everything. I'm a god in this world.
Guillaume discovering the power of Unreal Engine might seem like a minor thing, but it's actually a really central part of this story, because one of the things he talks about the most when discussing the success of Expedition 33 is that Sandfall owes a lot to technology like Unreal Engine 5, which lets really small teams create things that look like they were made by much bigger teams. The visual fidelity that Unreal Engine 5 can produce is a notable step up over 4, and new tools like MetaHuman make it easier than ever before to create really detailed, expressive characters. You know all those detailed, nuanced facial animations we see in Expedition 33, they were all recorded on iPhones running the Unreal Engine app, which can capture facial data and transpose it real time onto characters' faces. These sorts of technological innovations just weren't there as few as 5 years ago, but now they are, and they provide an extremely economical means of producing the sort of results that would have taken vastly more time, money, and manpower in the past. Don't believe me? We'll take it from this guy because he knows what he's talking about.
I think maybe the thing that has changed the most in the 10 to last 5 years, it's making realistic 3D basically as a small team, because I think we could have made the same game 10 years ago, but the only thing that would be different most likely was a team the same size, but I think it would have been stylized. There are so many small topics in terms of game development and optimization that when you are making a project this big, if you don't have the tools to help you a little bit, and Nanite has been, for example, a huge help when it comes to optimizing poly count and geometry. If we had to release 5 years ago, I think we would have less content because we would have spent more time optimizing basically everything.
That was Tom Guillermin, and he is the technical director of Sandfall Interactive. He comes in early in this story because he's actually the second important thing that happened in Malmo. Guillaume and Tom met each other while Tom was working as a gameplay programmer on The Division 2, and the two quickly struck up a friendship.
We were both French, and we both liked to, go out and have drinks. Yeah, we met from being in the same team, but we had like common interest as well, and Unreal became one of them.
With that friendship budding, Guillaume was still working late nights trying to teach himself Unreal Engine, and he decided that the best way to do that was to have a project in mind, since that gives you some really clear goals to work towards and challenges to overcome. But what to build? Well, Guillaume was raised on JRPGs. As a man of culture, he recognizes that Final Fantasy VIII was indeed the best Final Fantasy, and he also enjoyed the likes of Lost Odyssey. He had a real thing for turn-based RPGs with a more realistic art style, and lamented that that sort of game just wasn't made anymore, especially after the Final Fantasy series moved away from its turn-based roots.
It kind of comes from the fact also that this kind of game, like with high fidelity graphics, doing turn-based in this style, because for me, Baldur's Gate is a different style of turn-based. It's more like Western turn-based, but this kind of JRPG turn-based with this kind of graphics are not really done anymore since Lost Odyssey. And I think it's just that there is this big empty space in the market, which is basically why I started this project. It's just I wanted to play a game like this.
The choice to make a turn-based JRPG style game with a more realistic visual style was the cornerstone on which the rest of Expedition 33 was built, and while many other parts of the project would change or evolve, the commitment to that vision remained steadfast, and that commitment was one of the biggest reasons why the game would come together so well in the end.
But I'd say that the thing that drove the production was, I think, the gameplay, because it was crystal clear, and I think that's a big reason why we were able to make the game happen, is that in terms of direction it was really, really, really clear in terms of what we were trying to do.
But there was another crucial aspect to that foundational vision, and it was the dodging and the parrying, additions that felt like an evolution for the turn-based formula. Other games like Mario RPG had combined these more actiony elements with turn-based combat before, but Guillaume had actually never played that before, and so he was inspired by something else entirely.
Basically, I was playing Sekiro on the side when I was working on learning Unreal, so I had my turn-based in place, and just one night I was just why can't I parry in my game? That's boring.
So by now, Guillaume had an idea based on some strong foundational elements and a hunger to do more, but he reached the limits of what he was able to achieve alone, so it was now time to begin gathering his party.
I knew I needed help to realize my dream. First, I turned to a programmer I knew would get it.
Guillaume and I started trading ideas right away, and that quickly turned into trading files back and forth. Soon, I was creating the first prototypes of the reactive turn-based system, combining real-time offense and defense element, and a cinematic battle camera system.
Okay, just pausing here, this video gives you the impression that Expedition 33 kind of always looked like this, but that's not the case. Here's how Expedition 33 actually looked at around the same time that these initial foundations were being tested. This is the first publicly released footage of Expedition 33, sort of. Back then it was called We Lost, and it wasn't set in France, but instead had a Victorian theme. A number of characters like Mayel and Lune were already in the mix and would remain, but almost everything other than them and the core gameplay would be abandoned in a reboot that would later occur, but we'll get to that later. For now, it's 2019 and Guillaume had left Malmo to move to a Ubisoft office in Shanghai where he was working as the narrative director and product manager for a Heroes of Might and Magic mobile game, while Tom was working on Beyond Good and Evil 2. One question that comes up a lot when it comes to the origins of Expedition 33 is why didn't Guillaume pitch this to Ubisoft and make it with them rather than starting a whole new studio, which is a much riskier path? It's been reported that Guillaume has said that it would have taken 25 years to make this game at Ubisoft. That's not quite what he said.
To basically be able to pitch this kind of project, it takes a very long time. Like I said, just 25 because it's just a rough approximation, is probably less than that. But just to be able to be in a position where you can pitch this kind of idea, like just pitch to be able to make it happen, it takes a very long time because you have to navigate, you have to be like high enough in the hierarchy to just be able to propose these kind of ideas, especially if you ask for a budget that is not that small. That's what I meant by like just being able to make it happen for real. It's not that the production will take 25 years. It's just that the way to navigate all the company until you can make this kind of project approved and then get it done takes a really, really long time.
No doubt Ubisoft are kicking themselves that they didn't get the chance to make this for themselves, and I think stories like this are a real wake-up call for major publishers. The credits for Assassin's Creed Shadows stretch for 2 hours. There are thousands and thousands of people listed. Do you really need that many people working on one game? Maybe take a handful of them and put them to work on some incubation projects that might just produce the next Expedition 33. I'm being flippant, of course, but I'm also not, in the sense that Guillaume and Tom really did feel that Ubisoft would not let them make this game, so they had to go and do it for themselves. And it's a common story in the sense that many newly formed teams spin up because their founders felt like their AAA employers just weren't set up to let them pitch or incubate new ideas. If publishers take any lessons from the success of Expedition 33, hopefully it's that they need to foster cultures and processes that invite and support new game ideas rather than tacitly telling staff that they're better off taking those ideas elsewhere. So at this point, Guillaume and Tom are working hard on their prototype. They're pretty certain that Ubisoft isn't the sort of place where they can make their dream happen, and they're feeling ready to take things to the next level. But in order to do that, they're going to have to recruit just a few more party members. To this point, you've been listening to a fairly common, dare I say, predictable story. Two young, ambitious game makers frustrated with their big publisher employer, deciding to go out alone. We've heard that story many times before, but trust me, here's where it starts to get pretty crazy. In 2019, both Guillaume and Tom were working their full-time jobs, but they were so certain that they were going to make a go of this that they reached out to one Francois Maurice.
Oh, he was a friend of mine from university.
Right, okay.
And we're in the same student association, so we just were friends back then.
Right.
We drank a lot together, so we became close. And after that, we kind of lost touch a little bit. Like we were basically sending each other one message per year, just like, how are you doing? Where are you in your life now? And so when I was looking for someone to handle the more administrative and relationship side of the studio, not the creation itself, I contacted him and he just said yes pretty much instantly and quit his job the following week.
Here's an interesting fact about Francois that's really going to set the tone for the rest of this chapter. He'd never worked in game dev before. In fact, before this, Francois was working at a company called Marcel, which is kind of like Uber, but French. He'd worked there for 3.5 years, but in August of 2020, he quit his job and went all in on Sandfall. He was so quick off the starting blocks that he was actually Sandfall's second full-time employee, since both he and Guillaume started in September 2020, but Tom wouldn't end up leaving Ubisoft until the following year. Francois' job was Chief of Operations, and part of that involved raising money. Francois did manage to convince a number of angel investors to come on board, and with that seed funding, the team could now look to fill their most urgent gaps, namely art and music. Enter Nicolas Maxime Francom, the man who would eventually go on to become art director for Expedition 33. Here's a fun fact about Nicolas that's kind of like the other fun fact I mentioned earlier. Prior to Sandfall, Nicolas had never worked in game dev. The only other job he'd had before working at Sandfall was at an events company that organized Cirque du Soleil style productions.
Yeah, my role was basically to make like illustrations and concept art like on some maquettes that basically aren't like that aren't lit, that don't have any like dancers or performers on yet. So then that's my job to sort of like paint over these like empty shows and like add like certain elements to it to make it like vibrant. So that's kind of what I was doing.
Hearing that Nicholas had this background in audacious event design was a real aha moment. Playing Expedition 33 really does feel like you're walking around these elaborately designed sets and fighting these fabulously fashionable enemies. Enemies are less about their physical structure and more about the costumes they wear over that structure. It's one of the things that gives Expedition 33's art design such distinctiveness. So how did Guillaume find Nicholas and how did they get connected? Well, you're going to hear this a lot in this section, but it's actually, you know what? I'll just let Guillaume tell it.
The whole story of this project is stupid. It's really like just people saying yes instantly. So for Nicholas, so we were looking for an art director to lead the artistic vision of the game. And I had a list of people I really liked from the internet, from diverse websites, a lot on ArtStation, and Nicholas was basically the top one. But I was expecting my list that nobody says okay, and I will make a second list, and I will at one point it will work. But just send the mail to Nicholas, and he was like, yeah, let's do it.
So just to be clear, Guillaume was just browsing through various ArtStation pages and making lists of people he liked. He liked Nicholas's work the most, and when he emailed him, Nicholas immediately said yes, and they started working together. The art design of Expedition 33 is extraordinary. It is utterly unique. It is so sumptuous and rich, but it's never saccharine or overexposed or garish. It's this enchanted Baroque-era circus that's equally beautiful and terrifying. It's a monumental achievement, and the starting point for it is a guy who'd never worked in video games before, and who was discovered because the game director liked his ArtStation. And if you like that story, you're gonna love this next one.
Pendant des années, j'écoutais de la musique de compositeurs de jeux vidéo le soir avant de m'endormir. Donc je pouvais écouter 2-3 heures des OST avant de dormir. Et j'adorais entendre du coup tous les micro-détails qu'il y a dans le fond des musiques.
Encore plus de rythmique ouais, je pense qu'on peut en avoir besoin.
Meet Lorient Testa, the composer for Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Lorient grew up playing video games, and he told me that the Nintendo 64 was his favorite console, and he grew up playing the likes of Ocarina of Time and Donkey Kong 64. When you hear this guy's music, you imagine that he's been playing music like before he could walk or talk, but in reality, he didn't actually pick up an instrument until much later in his life.
It was a guitar when I was 16, so I found the guitar on my grandma's house, and then I started learning by myself for 3 years, and then I go on music school to define my skill a bit more and to work on my instruments.
So, this guy taught himself guitar, and then he went to music school, where you imagine that he studied composition, because if you're going to produce music that is this unbelievably good, you probably had to be trained how to do that. Not so much.
No, it wasn't my studies. My studies was guitar playing and musical theories. So no, it was on my free time. I really love and want to create video game music. So I listened to a lot of video game music like all my whole life, and I spent time listening a lot and trying to have fun on my computer and create my own music for video games.
Wow. So you sort of taught yourself how to do this composition. You sort of just figured it out as you went.
Yeah. It was like an autonomous process for me to do that.
So just to recap, the person who composed one of the best soundtracks of this generation didn't start playing music until he was 16. He went to music school, but he didn't study composition, and he taught himself composition by making fan music based on video game trailers that he liked.
I take a trailer from so many different games, and then I compose like my song on it to try to follow what the spirit of the game was and what I was feeling from the games. So, for example, I take Donkey Kong trailers, and then I try to write a song in the Donkey Kong DNA, and then the week after it was for another game. So and I worked like that for many times.
Lorient created 50 of these original pieces of music based on games he loved or was inspired by, and he created these songs in his spare time while he worked 4 days a week as a guitar teacher. Eventually, he put all those songs into a playlist and he posted on a now deleted indie game music forum. At that point, fate took the wheel.
I was looking for a composer, and one night I went to like one very, very obscure indie gaming forum with like 10 people on it. I don't know, absolutely nobody. And this one night, 1 hour before me, Lorient went to this forum and he never been there ever either. He just posted this sound. I was like, oh, this is very cool. Okay, let me contact him. Just send the mail and yeah, okay, let's do it. And from then, 8 hours of music later, we ship Expedition 33.
So, just to be clear, the guy who composed the soundtrack for Clair Obscur Expedition 33 never studied composition, had never worked in video games, had never had any of his music published, and was found by pure chance on a tiny little indie game music forum that has since been deleted. Can you imagine if one link in that chain had failed and these two people had never met? We'd be denied the absolute genius of this fucking bassline. Funny story, by the way, this song nearly didn't make it into the game because Lorient didn't think it was good enough. This man is out here producing so many bangers that he can no longer spot a banger when he makes one. Guillaume made an executive decision and rescued this one from the cutting room floor, and thank God he did. So right now we have a game director and technical lead with only 8 years of experience between them, a studio boss who's never led a studio, an art director who's never worked in video games, a composer with no formal training in composition and who's never done any professional composition. You know what we really need to cap things off? A writer who's never worked in video games, who's never had any of their writing published, and whose most recent career experience involved being locked up for 2 months in a space module as part of a psychological experiment run by NASA.
I participated in this mission simulation where we simulate a astronaut mission to an asteroid and back. I had an amazing crew. It was me and 3 other people. We were locked into a module for 2 months. We were on in a module that they built in Houston in one of their giant warehouses. And we were locked in for 2 months. We didn't see the sun. We didn't see the sky. We could only talk to mission control. And I had like the best crewmates. They were amazing. And that also, I drew on that experience for Expedition 33.
All right, I guess it's time to properly introduce Jennifer Svedberg-Yen. You may have heard that Jen was discovered on Reddit, aka Expedition 33's lead writer is a Redditor, and there are very few things you can call someone that is more offensive than that term, so I think it's necessary to wind back a little and outline this person's credentials. Jennifer Svedberg-Yen attended Wharton Business School, one of the finest schools in the world, where she studied economics and mathematics. She was on the dean's list every single year, and she graduated summa cum laude, which is like, you literally can't do any better than that. So the starting point for all this is to understand that Jen is basically a genius. Jen was naturally a creative person who really enjoyed reading, and she wrote for herself as a hobby, but after graduating, she went and did what most really smart graduates of business schools do. She worked in finance. That wasn't really floating her boat.
Of course, I went into a very non-creative field of finance. And so I stopped writing during that period. I just didn't really have the time or the energy or, to be honest, the creativity. Like, just there was no spark there for me.
She ended up leaving that job in 2015, and with some free time on her hands, she just started trying out some stuff. She did that crazy NASA thing. She taught dance. She did a variety of martial arts. Eventually, she found her way to Australia, of all places. Since her husband's work had sent him there, she was living in Parramatta, and it's here, the home of the mighty eels, that her expedition begins.
During COVID lockdown, get kind of bored. Right. And I was on Reddit, again, as you do, browsing Reddit, and came across a Reddit post in the subreddit, record this for free, from Guillaume, looking for free voice actors for a technical test that he was doing.
This here is that Reddit post, and who better to read it to you than the man himself? Take it away, Guillaume.
My name is Guillaume, and I am working with a small team of indie dev on an ambitious AA game planned to release on PC and possibly PS4 and Xbox One. We are seasoned game developers who have already worked on AAA titles, who started a passion project 1 year ago that is turning into a serious title that we want to release. For that, we are preparing a demo and a trailer to interest potential investors and/or prepare a Kickstarter, and that's where we need you.
It was a request made at a time when Guillaume and Tom were trying to pull together a prototype trailer to show to angel investors and maybe even a Kickstarter, and despite the fact that it was from a newly formed team, and despite the fact that it wasn't paid work, it piqued Jen's interest.
Since I was doing a lot of random stuff at the time, I was thinking, hey, that sounds cool. I've never done voice acting. That sounds fun. And I had just signed up, I think, at that time for like a little acting improv class that I thought would be fun. So I'm like, oh yeah, let's try this out. This might be cool. And I was cast for 2 roles.
And that's true, by the way. Jen was brought on as a voice actor for this project, but the team of people involved was small, and Jen had both creative urges and some time on her hands, so she and Guillaume would chat on Discord about the lines she was supposed to be reading.
We started talking about the dialogue, and since I am a native English speaker and I do writing on the side for myself, like I do write, like I have written before, but just nothing published. It's just for me personally. So I said, hey, do you want me to clean up the dialogue a bit? It's like, oh yeah, sure. And then we started talking about the story, and then I started asking, well, why is this happening? What about this? Oh, maybe if this would be cool. And then it was just very organic. We just got really into discussing story, and then just like, oh, what about this? Oh, that'd be cool if we did this. And then it just sort of spiraled from there.
When Jen says it sort of spiraled from there, what she really means is she became the lead writer on the game, spending the next 3 years writing the story, script, and supporting world-building material. She even went so far as to write a brief history of a number of the expeditions, a history of Lumiere and its great families, as well as a family history for Gustav that stretched back a number of generations. All of her writing was remarkable. I'll talk more about it later. There's such a beautiful sensitivity and delicateness and humanity to the characters she's written, and it seems almost impossible that this sits alongside a world of such unfettered breadth and imagination. How do you write so big and so small at the same time without ever losing your balance? I don't know, but Jen certainly does. And just to be clear, Jen had no formal training as a writer, had never done any professional writing to this point, and was discovered on Reddit while applying for a job as a voice actor, even though she had no experience as a voice actor either. Throughout this block, I've spent a lot of time talking about the lack of qualifications and experience of these people in their chosen fields, and the intent is not to imply that they should have been more qualified, or that they overcame this lack of experience to somehow produce something great. The intent is to highlight the fact that everyone here is just a straight up, stone cold S-tier talent right out of the bottle. Just pop the cork and outsprays the best shit you have ever seen, read, or heard in your entire life. And it's like, how on earth did these people find each other? Now listen, I'm not a spiritual or superstitious person, but I'm sorry. The chance that a group of people this talented suddenly find each other when most of them don't even work in the video game making field, that they just suddenly came together to produce one of the best RPGs of all time on their first go around, something happened here, man. Like something I can't explain. Something that's basically impossible. Call it fate, call it divine intervention, call it what you will. Guillaume certainly has a word for it.
The story of Zenless is a miracle for me, really.
That's yeah.
And indeed, it does feel pretty miraculous, but I do think that Guillaume is selling himself short just a little when he describes it that way, because ultimately, it was he who smartly judged Francois' business acumen. He saw what he saw in Nicholas's art, he heard what he heard in Lorien's music, and he read what he read in Jen's writing. As romantic as it is to imagine that fate alone willed these people together, there was another force involved, and that force was Guillaume, and his willingness to trust the talent he saw rather than the experience that he didn't. But it is at least a little bit funny how this ragtag group of people felt, and how much life can sometimes imitate art.
And so it's sort of like an RPG where Guillaume assembled his random party from random places.
Finally, there was one other force at work that helped bring these people together, and it's one you probably wouldn't expect.
Like one point that helped in a way is that it was the COVID period when we sent all these messages, and a lot of people were like looking for a new meaning in their life and just wanting to just start something different.
When Guillaume started sending out emails, COVID was kicking off and the world was locking down. Nicholas was working for an events management company, not many events going on around then. Lorien was a guitar teacher but had to stop giving lessons because of lockdowns. Jen was locked down in Parramatta, her dance and martial arts classes cancelled. Plenty of time to reflect on what it's like living through an age when an omnipresent, unknowable force was suddenly and cruelly plucking vulnerable individuals from existence. From the despair, isolation, and grief of COVID came a story about grief, told through the lens of creativity and art, made by a group of people who were bursting at the seams to pour their unrealized talent into something beautiful. The name Clair Obscur is often overlooked in favor of just shorthanding the game to Expedition 33, but the term Clair Obscur means something. It's the French translation of the Italian word chiaroscuro. It's an artistic term that refers to the contrast between light and dark. Expedition 33 explores that contrast deliberately through its story, characters, world, and art, but it also explores it incidentally in the sense that something as bright as Clair Obscur Expedition 33 could ultimately have found its origins in such a dark chapter. So, it's now September 2020. The core team of 6 people has been assembled. They are each of them immensely talented and chomping at the bit to be able to apply that talent to something they truly care about. They have the time and the willingness, and they are ready to go. There is just one problem. They kind of don't really want to make the thing they're currently making. To this point, everyone had been brought on board to bring We Lost to life. That was the original vision of Guillaume, and it was the one that had a Victorian setting as well as a bunch of other stuff.
Zombies, aliens, and various other dragons and things.
Everyone was on board with this direction, but as Francois and Guillaume were pitching the idea to investors and publishers, it just wasn't sticking. There was some interest, but not enough to get them over the line. Guillaume also had this niggling feeling in the back of his mind that something wasn't quite right, and all of this eventually came to a head.
Like we received, especially like one piece of feedback of someone who said, who was a big fan of JRPGs and Persona, and he just told us, I think you can go a lot more original with what you do. So that's what kind of triggered it, but it was always in the back of my mind of, we can do better. And it's just like this little push, let's say, that pushed out over the barrier, and it was a really good decision and really great advice, because after that, yeah, we rebooted the story and the world to make something a lot more unique and a lot more thoughtful.
I think it's important in this moment to remember how Expedition 33 began. It was primarily based on gameplay, the desire for an action turn-based model that combined the likes of Final Fantasy and Sekiro, utilizing realistic 3D visuals instead of something more stylized. That was what Guillaume was truly passionate about, and his commitment to that never changed throughout the entire life of the project. But he was less committed to this Victorian setting, and now with a team assembled around him, he was happy to begin the process of building a new shared vision, even though it meant throwing out a bunch of work that had already been done.
So that's when Guillaume called me and it's just like, hey, Reboot, what do you think about that?
Yeah.
And at the time I was like, oh, we just spent a few months putting together the narrative Bible for We Lost.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I guess all of that is just going to be like, But then I was like, okay. But then I thought about it and I'm like, it is actually cool, because then we can really start from scratch and really think about, and I could be part of that story building process from the very beginning.
So at this point, Guillaume and Jen had agreed that a reboot was the right call, and they had to reimagine the world, story, and characters that would give this action turn-based combat its meaning. But with the canvas essentially wiped clean, pun intended, where would they begin?
So initially we started off with the hook. So actually we were brainstorming quite a bit of different types of hooks, and I think Guillaume saw an image on some sort of art site or something with a woman and a monolith, kind of inspired that idea of, okay, what if it's a doomsday clock? What if it's sort of like that idea? And then we were trying to figure out, okay, that's just a hook. That's not a story, right? Like what is the story? Like, who is she? What is she doing? Why is she doing this? And we were trying to figure that out, and that actually we got stuck for a while, for a little bit, where we came up with a bunch of alternatives, didn't really like any of them. At that time, I was working on a short story that had actually come to me in a dream as well.
Right.
And that short story, I realized actually could work with the hook. It could explain who the paintress is, what she's doing, how she's doing it. It could create the story beneath the story in terms of what is actually going on. So all of the things that you find out in Act 3, for instance, all of the things that you play through, that was really what was going on behind Act 1, Act 2, those revelations that originated in a short story that I was working on.
With the ball now rolling on the narrative reimagining, it was also necessary to reimagine the setting and art style. That job would, of course, fall to Nicholas.
I know that I wanted something incredibly different from things that we've generally seen. So, all the numerous like biomes and universes that we've already seen. They've been kind of like been recycled over and over again. So just I think purely out of instinct as well, just wanted to come up with something to has not yet been seen.
One of the things the team agreed on during this time was that their Victorian setting just wasn't as original as it needed to be. Plus, this was a team based in France, so why not set things a little closer to home?
So when we thought, okay, so why don't we make it more personal and look more towards like the French eras, and we landed on the Belle Epoque, and we just thought it hasn't been explored that much. It's beautiful. It's a culture that we know very well. I mean, even if Nicolas is technically Belgium, he understands France very well, and it just felt right. And like when we just considered it, all the pieces kind of clicked together. Okay, like yeah, we could take Paris and we throw it in the middle of the ocean, and we make it weird and dystopian, and we mix it with fantasy, surrealism, and just once we just thought, why not try that? It just felt very, very fluid from there.
Just then, Guillaume mentioned something called the Belle Epoque, which was a period of French history that is characterized as a bit of a golden age. The turmoil of the Revolutionary and Napoleonic eras had passed, and the First World War was yet to begin. France prospered economically, diplomatically, and in particular artistically. Painting, poetry, literature, theatre, music, dance, the arts thrived, hence Belle Epoque, which in English means the beautiful era. So at this point, at the start of 2021, the team was now together. The reboot process is imagining a new story and a new world, and Guillaume and Francois are doing what needs to be done to keep the lights on, raising money. The obvious choice is getting a publisher deal, but that's tough to do when you're going through a reboot and you don't even have a vertical slice to show off. Still, they did try their best. They met with publishers and were told no by all of them. Though they did have some good conversations, most notably with one Alexis Garavarian, CEO of Kepler Interactive. That conversation didn't go anywhere, but the vibes were excellent. That's going to become important in just a moment. For now though, Francois and Guillaume managed to scrape together just enough funding from angel investors to keep the dream alive. During this time, the studio was around 8 people since they'd welcomed in their first employees, and together they created a vertical slice based on the level that would eventually become Yellow Harvest. In March 2022, the team brought this vertical slice with them to the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, one of the most important events on the calendar for developers looking to get their games funded. 12 months ago, publishers weren't interested in Expedition 33. Now though, a very different story, and Guillaume was still reflecting on that conversation he'd had with the Kepler Interactive CEO a year earlier.
We had a lot of different offers from big or small publishers. I mean, we were surprised by that because the game style is kind of niche. Or it was at the time. Like this kind of realistic turn-based game wasn't really made anymore. But I think it talked deeply to the gamers, also on the publisher side of like, yeah, this is probably a game that they would also want to play. But yeah, what we really liked with Kepler is the fact that it's a relatively new, small publisher made of indie studios, but also they had some previous experience working for Column Knight because it's kind of the same entity. And yeah, when you talk with people who you feel align with your visions of the market, of how the game in general should be, and also like a young company, because we were a super young company, so just talk the same language, compared to speaking with like a giant of the industry.
And indeed, Kepler Interactive was a young company, and their story is almost as fascinating as the story of Sandfall itself. Kepler is a games publisher, but it's really not like the others. It's actually a co-op in the sense that it's owned by a collection of indie game studios, including A44, who did Ashen, Ebb Software, who did Scorn, Slowclap, who did Sifu, and a bunch of other smaller studios. The goal was for them to be able to pool their resources to facilitate their own releases, but also publish stuff made by other studios. And the benefit of being led by people who make really good video games, as opposed to being led by your average video game executive, is that these people actually know a good game when they see it. That's why they brought Pacific Drive to market back in 2023, and that was one of the best games released that year. That's why they brought the excellent Ultros to market, a brilliant, stunningly artistic Metroidvania. That's why they released Bionic Bay in April of 2025. That's got an 87 on Metacritic, making it one of the highest rated games of the year. And that is why they signed Clair Obscur Expedition 33, a game made by an upstart team staffed by people who, by and large, had never made a game before. But in the same way that Guillaume could sense talent where it was to be found, Kepler saw what this team had already achieved with the limited resources and experience that they had, and that alone was enough to convince them to take a chance on this new outfit. They drew up a contract, got the signatures they needed, and by mid-2022, they were now the official publisher of Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Zenless couldn't be happier. The reboot was a success, aligning the team behind a bold new vision. Publisher interest had vindicated their decisions because you don't get that sort of interest unless you're onto something. They had a publishing partner who was aligned to that vision and a kindred spirit in the sense that they were both upstart companies looking to do things their own way. The train was well and truly on the track and pulling away from the station. Now it was time to hit the accelerator. It's now mid-2022, and with a publisher on board, the future of the game's development was all but certain. The team had moved into a new HQ in Montpellier, a classy old residence turned working space, which the team dubbed The Manor. Nice little Easter egg there. That building gave the team plenty of space to work, in fact, too much space, and attention now turned to the important task of filling that building with bodies. And that sounds really bad when I say it like that. I just mean they needed to hire people, that's all. Let's keep moving. Over the next 3 years, Landfall Interactive would grow to about 32 people, but this hiring process is actually one of the most crucial parts of the Expedition 33 success story, because it actually mirrored Guillaume's approach to hiring his core team. He wasn't looking for CV line items, he was looking for raw talent, and it didn't matter if those people he hired had never made a game before. What percentage of your staff would you say would be junior level staff? Are we talking like 50%? Of people at sort of that sort of graduate level, first sort of, couple of years of their career?
No, it's like 80%.
80%.
Yeah, most people are just like out of school or have like an internship behind them.
I think it's one thing for this inexperienced core team to come together in the way that they did, but it's another for them to back themselves so comprehensively that they didn't seek out highly experienced veterans to buttress their lack of experience. I mean, it seems pretty logical to look at the fact that you hadn't really done a thing before and go, hey, maybe we should hire someone who has done this before. But that just wasn't how Guillaume saw it. He really did believe in the people he hired, and I guess he had good reason to, since the people he was hiring had to make it through a really demanding recruitment process. In order to hire those 30-ish people, the core team hosted over 200 interviews with candidates, and throughout the process, Guillaume was looking for impressive portfolio work, a spirit of entrepreneurship and self-guided learning, but most importantly, one ingredient, one thing above all.
Passion. And knowing that someone is passionate about their job just makes the interview process so much easier. I mean, it's something that you feel in 2 seconds, really. Like during an interview when someone talks and you have like stars in their eyes about what they talk about compared to someone who just, yeah, I did that. And, I mean, some people are more expressive than others, and that, I'm not saying that you have to be super expressive. It can also be super annoying if you just do too much and it's just fake. But just when you talk about something you're passionate about, I think it just transpires if it's honest.
So let's meet one of those passionate new hires right now. Say hello to Michelle Nora, lead game designer for Expedition 33, and the person who's responsible for one of the gameplay's most defining characteristics, its breakability. Michel graduated with a Bachelor of Mathematics and landed his first job working on the French MMO Dofus. I hadn't heard of it before, but he assures me that it's big in France. It's a tactical turn-based, grid-based MMO, and Michel tells me that he was hooked on it the way that most of us were hooked on World of Warcraft back in the day. His job there was focused on game design and balance, with a particular focus on endgame encounters and class design. He worked there for 6 years before making the jump to Wolcen Studio, which worked on the rather ill-fated Wolcen, an ARPG that had a lot of promise, but that was terminally undone by a number of technical issues. So while the rest of the team spent their lives playing JRPGs, Michel was actually inspired by different games altogether.
For me, it was, said before, it's like different from what inspired the game overall. For me, it was more my experience on Dofus that inspired me a lot with how we balanced the game and the experience I got there. But also got a lot of my design philosophy, I would say, from games like Dota 2 and Path of Exile, that are basically games that allow player to do a lot of, basically do whatever they want. If I want to push it, it's not really true, but it's kind of the philosophy around it. And just have fun with it. They're not games that will force players to play a certain way. And what I like with game usually is that they give me tools, and I try to use them or not, and I have fun with it. And in the end, I can do break the game and do stupid stuff or whatever.
Playing through Expedition 33, you go into it expecting a big world to explore, a sweeping storyline full of riveting events and characters, and you do expect some tight JRPG-inspired turn-based combat. But what you don't expect is how ludicrously breakable this combat model is. The Luminas and Pictos that are the foundation of your power are so numerous and so potent, and the math that underpins them is so multiplicative that you can achieve some truly staggering damage output, to the point where players quickly discovered that Mael could do like 5 billion damage in a single hit using an ability called Stendhal that was eventually nerfed. And I asked Michelle why the team decided to do that when so many other broken builds existed. Why intervene here and not elsewhere?
I think what we tried to do under the game design team is just provide a lot of tools. All of them are balanced, but if you combine them, then it breaks the game. Standard was just broken on its own. So you don't need anything else to break the game. Just need Standard, and then it works. So that was a balancing error that kind of arrived too late in the development cycle to be fixed before the release. It was my bad, of course, but it happens. Thank God we're a solo game, so people can just not play it, and it won't bother anybody else. But I think that's the philosophy. Is just you're allowed to do broken stuff, but if one thing is broken alone without having any need for any support, you don't have to make any effort to make it broken. Then it's not fun, because you don't feel rewarded for finding something. It's just it's broken, that's all.
His answer really does make a lot of sense if you've played Expedition 33 and got to grips with how deep and rewarding the Pictos, Luminas, and weapons can be. There are some really broken builds that you can look up on YouTube if you want to, but you can also just read the descriptions of these things, and because they're also clearly explained and so intuitive in their functionality, with a little bit of imagination, you can get yourself pretty close to what those min-max YouTube builds would be prescribing. The key is that all these elements synergize so smartly and so intuitively, and rather than limit the player's options for fear that they may find something too powerful, Michelle specifically designed a gameplay model that basically forces you to find something too powerful, since some of the endgame encounters are borderline undoable unless you figured out all the ways you can break this video game. So Guillaume provided a vision for a turn-based, parry-based combat model. Michelle provided the math and itemization that will let you do unspeakable amounts of damage, but the combat was still missing one key ingredient. It didn't look cool enough, and Guillaume couldn't find anyone in France who could make it look cool enough, so we had to go further afield.
So most of our combat animations have been done by actually a Korean team. So stupid story is we knew what we wanted for the battle, and I had a very clear vision of what kind of animation I wanted for the battles. Except like in France and even in Europe, like I couldn't find a single animator who like did this kind of animation. So I was just like looking through YouTube, like through animation reels of animators and stuff. And very often I was like, okay, this is cool. Okay, this guy is Korean. Oh, this is cool. Okay, this guy is Korean. And like I just watched like 25 reels in a row, and I said, okay, just Korean reels, and they just do exactly what I need. So basically, I took a list and I sent mails to like 200 Korean animators or something like that, and one answered, Sang-yoon, our first animator, and he's absolutely brilliant.
The person he's talking about here is Kim Seong-young, and this is one of the animation reels. You can absolutely see that this person went on to make Expedition 33 animations. There is an unmistakable signature to them that you can see in the character's momentum, the movement of the camera, and so much more. So Seong-yoon joined the project on a part-time basis, and as they got further into the project, they needed help. So they actually invited a bunch of their animation friends to join, all of whom were working in the animation industry already. There were a total of 8 people working on combat animations for Clair Obscur Expedition 33. All of them were based in Korea, and none of them, not a single one, was ever full-time on the project. Throughout the entire game's development, they all worked part-time so they could keep their regular day jobs. So all of these incredible S-tier combat animations you're seeing here, these were all done as a side hustle. Absolutely insane. I think this would be an excellent time to answer that really, really big question of how many people worked on Expedition 33, because it's been a point of some back and forth. See, many people have said that Expedition 33 was made by 33 people or whatever, and that's not at all correct. Other people have said that there are 400 people listed in the credits of Expedition 33, so therefore 400 people made this game. And it's like, well, that's sort of true, but also not really precise enough. Here are the facts. Expedition 33 started off as a passion project from one guy tinkering around in Unreal. He then invited his buddy to help him out. They then invited Guillaume's mate to run the studio. They then hired a writer, art director, and composer, and by September 2020, the team that was assembled had all been working for free to that point. In 2021, when some investor money started to come in, the team grew modestly to around 10 people, and that was enough to build a vertical slice. In 2022, the game got a publisher and headcount grew to around 15 people, and the first members of the outsourced Korean animation team joined the project on a part-time basis. This let Sandfall get to the point where all of Act 1 was now fully playable. In 2023, the studio grew to around 30 people, plus the full contingent of outsourced animation, which is around 8 people, again, part-time only. This let them get the game to a finished alpha state with all content in. 2024 was spent finalizing, polishing, and testing the game, and headcount increased slightly during this time. Sandfall actually peaked at around 40 people before some people rolled off the project. In addition to this, Tom was determined to give credit to Ebb Software, another Kepler studio and the developer of the Love It or Hate It Scorn. They had a team of 4 people there that helped Sandfall with console porting. So, if you're asking how many people worked at or adjacent to Sandfall during Expedition 33's development, the answer to that question is roughly 50 people, a number I confirmed with Tom when speaking with him. But the reality of making a modern game is that it's often a deeply cooperative process that includes so many people who don't work at the studio whose name goes on the box. This game wouldn't be what it is without its voice cast, and they don't appear in that list of 50 people. Same goes for the dozens and dozens of outsourced QA staff who did a phenomenal job ensuring the game's impressively robust launch state. People in so many non-English speaking countries wouldn't be able to play this game at all were it not for localization teams. The list goes on. So, how many people worked at or adjacent to Sandfall? Roughly 50 people. But how many people contributed something integral to the final product? Many, many more than that. One of the biggest questions I had throughout this process was how much did it cost to make this video game? I'd heard different figures from different sources, but they had all heard it secondhand and I was never able to confirm an actual figure. However, it was very clear that compared to your average AAA or even AA budget, Expedition 33's budget was very lean. I didn't think Guillaume would give me an answer on this one, but I thought I'd shoot my shot anyway.
Did this game cost less than I don't know, $10 million to make? Is that at all possible?
No comment. We'll say one day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was not super expensive, let's say.
It was not super expensive. Okay. All right. Yeah, because as I said, doing my own math, yeah, it's pretty, yeah. Okay, cool. All right, fair enough. I totally understand what you mean.
Let's say that you can do bigger things with very small and talented teams than just by pouring a lot of money in and wasting time.
So Guillaume wasn't talking on this subject, but I will tell you this though. I was at Summer Games Fest in LA recently where I met with a number of different publishers and all of them were talking about Expedition 33 and how it managed to accomplish so much with so little. It's long been clear that the current AAA development model is unsustainable, with ballooning budgets that struggle to achieve ROI. Expedition 33 isn't the first game to show that a different way is possible, but given its staggering quality and production values, it's one of the most convincing arguments that quality and dollars spent are not always as closely correlated as the AAA scene would have you believe. As much of an impact as Expedition 33 is having on us as players, I can tell you it's having just as much impact on the executive class, and I'm sure that many a boardroom meeting will be referencing its thriftily achieved success in the months and years to come.
How did you end up here?
Your reflexes remain sharp as ever. Good luck,
For me, Clair Obscur is a remarkably accomplished video game, by which I mean things like its combat loop, itemization, world design, and secrets all keep me engaged in a way that few games are able to. But I won't lie, plenty of other games are able to achieve something similar. A tight, well-delivered gameplay loop is by no means easy, but developers do it often. Far more rare, though, is an experience that is as affecting as Expedition 33 is. Kind of experience that just lays you out and you stare dumbfounded as the credits roll, beginning the process of trying to make sense of how you feel about this thing. There have only been a handful of games that I've played that have done that to me, and I spent a lot of time thinking about what it was that got me to that point. What did Expedition 33 have that so many other games didn't? The answer to that question is going to be different for everyone, but I'll tell you where I landed. I think there is such humanity coursing through this. This is a completely made-up story about some weird Parisian multiverse stuffed full to bursting with big talking wooden dolls and a doomsday clock hanging over everyone's head, but the path into that world is the incredibly human characters that are the center of this story, and their writing, their voice performances, and even their musical themes are all so affecting that these characters each become these vivid realizations, the likes of which we rarely see in video games.
Like quite often you have a game and you know, I've done small parts in games that I'm not even credited with, but you know, where you've got a line and you're like, how on earth do I make this sound like a human is saying it, because it's so crap. As I say, none of the games that I am credited with,
of course,
at all, genuinely. But like this, you're there, and it's all there in the script with a team that knows it. Like Jen knew her script inside and out, and every like fiber of her being is in this script.
In talking to Jen, I was really keen to understand how she managed to accomplish this. What was she aiming at, and from where did she draw her inspiration? And how long did it even take to do this?
Yeah, I'd say 3 years, maybe. Let's see. 3 years. But, you know, honestly, if we didn't have, it could have kept going, because I think with creatives, you're always like, oh, we can change this, we can make this better. What about this? Maybe we tweak this. So at one point, like, we finally had to cut it off because we had to record. So we had to record the mocap, we had to record the voice. So that sort of was like, okay, pencils down, we're done at this point. So I think, yeah, it was like 3 years.
I spoke to Jen at length, really trying to understand these vivid depictions of humanity that she had written. She spoke about writing during COVID and that being a big source of inspiration, both for this specific story, but also about how we think about things like empathy for people we do and don't know, or the different ways individuals might react to a society-wide threat. In the beginning of the game, there's a now famous exchange with a woman that lays bare an ethical dilemma. In a world where everyone is doomed to die, is it cruel to bring life into that world? Or does the guaranteed shortness of life matter not? For better to have lived than never to have existed at all.
Your flowers? I didn't know about. I thought you were younger. And yet you didn't have children.
I'm not having this conversation with you again. Not today.
Do you care so little about the future of Lumiere? How can you be so selfish?
I am not selfish enough to bring others into our doomed world.
These are the sorts of questions that force us to reflect on the different ways that people we don't know might react to a threat like the Paintress. But it's all rather abstract, almost philosophical, where Jen applies a different lens when she's thinking about her main cast of characters.
I think we're very interested in who people are and why they're doing what they're doing. And I think that's what I always go back to. Why are they doing this? And does it make sense for this character? And there were times when, you know, we started to drift more into like plot. Like we wanted this kind of plot point. We wanted them to do this. And the characters just didn't want to go there. So those were times when it was very difficult to write. And I'm just like, this doesn't feel natural for the characters. It doesn't feel organic. It doesn't flow, you know? And so there were many times when we're just like, we're trying to get the characters to do something they don't want to do. And what I eventually like realized was, for me myself, like from just myself, my process, I really need to think about, how do I enter the scene? Like, what's my angle into this scene? Sort of a setup, sort of like where they are, what they're saying, what they're doing. And usually it's the first line. Like if I can find the right first line, then the rest is just role playing each character as they want to react. And they just, and I think that's also one of the mocap actors, or two of the mocap actors actually told me this, that during mocap, it was actually really easy to memorize their lines and to perform it, because they just had to react the way the character wants to. So it just felt very natural. And I think that's sort of what we tried to do, is really make sure that once you have that starting point in the scene, it's just people react the way they want to react. Let the characters do and say what they want, and then the scene just writes itself, almost.
I put it to Jen that she kind of makes it sound a little too easy, and she did elaborate further on how she was able to get into the headspace of each of her characters.
I think a big part of it is write what you know. And I think for me, like I said, this is my first like published work. I don't want to sound like I'm an expert in any way, because I am not an expert at all. But for me, myself, like I kept trying to come back to what feels authentic and what feels true. And the only reference point I have is myself. So I really mined a lot of my own experiences for that. And I pulled from different parts of my life. So for instance, Mael, I drew heavily from myself as a teen. A lot of the loneliness that I felt, the feeling that, something just doesn't make sense about the world. Like everybody just gets something that I don't seem to get. That's where a lot of that dialogue came from, was from feelings that I felt like. And for Lune, it's a lot of me in my 20s, also me working in finance and academia, grad school, things like that. Like Ciel was, I drew from experiences in my 30s with various like big life moments. For Gustav, I drew from a lot of my idealism, which is why I actually, I did a grad school program for international development at Harvard. It's international economic development, because at one point I wanted to help save the world. And so Gustav, I drew a lot of from the idealism and the naivety of that time period, there. So I drew from a lot of my imposter syndrome, and also my feelings of like, who am I? The duality of identity, because I'm Chinese American. I span a lot of different cultures. I've been a sort of nomad for a big part of my life, where I don't really feel like I have a true home. I drew upon all of those feelings, and Renoir is my inner Chinese mom, like all of the, you laugh, but it's true. It's how and some of his dialogue is actually inspired a bit by conversations I've had with my own parents about things, For me, like a lot of times for the dialogue, I go back to how would I react in this situation if it was me, and I think about myself in a particular point in time. How would that version of me react to this? What would they say?
It's just a matter of time before we're already dead. Look around, look.
This is not a foregone conclusion. When one falls, we continue.
Just as often as video game writing struggles to deliver believable human characters, it also often struggles with how much it should say versus leaving space for audiences to come to their own conclusions. In video games, there's a tendency to not only say the thing, but say it loudly, and then say it again just in case the player missed it. Expedition 33 isn't like that, because avoiding that narrative trap was one of the goals of the project from the outset.
Like when we were writing the script, we were like, okay, a lot of things are going to be unsaid, and I think it's something that is not done enough in video games, where I don't know if it's like technical limitations or things, but it's something that I really, really love in movies, like well-written movies, where like most of the things that you must know are just not said and go through the eyes, as you said, and just like the body movement of the characters.
It is the case that a good book or film will often leave the most interesting things unsaid, but video games as a medium haven't really figured this out. I think a lot about this, and I wonder if it's to do with how young this medium is. We've been reading for thousands of years, watching movies for over 130 years, but the cinematic interactive video game, that's less than 30 years old, depending on where you place the starting mark. Related to this, I think there's still a bit of a typecast that gamers are teenagers, and so if you're pitching your story in a AAA video game, you kind of want it to be at that young adult reading level. Nothing wrong with that, of course, but it does feel as though publishers don't really have a lot of faith in our intelligence, and one of the things I found most striking about Expedition 33 was that it didn't feel like that at all.
Jen really trusts the intelligence. I think you feel like that when you're talking to her socially. Like her assumption is that you're incredibly intelligent. And I really feel like that. And it was interesting because a friend of ours is a gamer, but really likes stuff handed to her on a plate. And she was kind of texting us yesterday, my partner and I yesterday, kind of going, I don't get it. I wasn't really listening and I don't understand. Like, and she's clever, don't get me wrong, but she's not after that kind of...
Sure.
She wants stuff given to her, and
she's sort of more lean back.
Yeah, and lean back and kind of have everything reminded over and over again. This game will not.
Lots of games will do that for her. Don't worry. There's no shortage of that.
Absolutely, and not to say that those games are bad, but this is just not that kind of game. It requires something of you. It requires an intelligence. It requires and an emotional intelligence as well.
There's one other aspect of this package that really resonates with me, and I hadn't even considered it until Guillaume mentioned it in an interview he did with Carnage.
One of the main focus since the beginning in the writing is to have everything feel very natural and very grounded, like not what you would expect in this type of game, where usually it's a bit like younger heroes, something about growing up. Like here, it's more really like people who have already lived their life in a very tragic world.
I grew up playing JRPGs, but as I got older, I moved away from that genre for a bunch of reasons. And one of the reasons was that the heroes were not really my vibe anymore a lot of the time. JRPGs are still, to this day, more often than not centered on stories of kids and teenagers. And don't get me wrong, I love me some Xenoblade and some Persona, but I think I'd be more interested in these stories if the tone was more adult. And I think that's the reason that I love Metaphor Refantatio so much. It was Persona, but its characters weren't all in that coming of age phase. Some of them were older and wiser and had really seen some shit. I didn't much like Final Fantasy XVI, but its darker, more adult tone was definitely one of its most appealing elements. Point is, this is a genre that many of us grew up on, but the genre hasn't really grown up with us, and I suspect that one of the reasons that Expedition 33 resonated with us is that it found a way to bring us back to that era where we played these sorts of games and we felt connected to the characters we played, but we're now doing so within the context of being older and wiser ourselves.
My experience playing this game and being a part of this game is it made me feel like I did when I was 11 years old, which is so hard. But they kind of went in, I think, thinking, how can I make players feel like they did when they were a kid? And exploring these worlds for the first time. And by understanding what that feeling was and the emotion that they wanted to evoke, and then knowing exactly what those composite parts were that made it.
Gustav? Are you real?
You finally come to learn to swim?
I'm not that fond of water.
As beautifully and poignantly written as Clair Obscur Expedition 33 was, that story and these characters wouldn't have affected us in the way that they did were it not for the phenomenal voice talent behind the cast. And much like the way the core Sandfall team came together, there's a bit of a story about how this voice cast was assembled. For nerds like us, names like Ben Starr and Jennifer English are already big draw cards. But for the sorts of people who live, normal lives and go outside and stuff, they were probably very excited to see both Charlie Cox and Andy Serkis involved. Cox plays the game's leading man, Gustav, while Serkis plays... well, if you know, you know, and if you don't, then you should go play the game. I was fortunate enough to be able to interview Andy Serkis some weeks prior to the game launching when he joined us on the Friends Per Second podcast, and we asked him what was it about this game that really drew him in, given that he didn't voice too many video games.
I mean, I was just approached with the material. I got sent the deck and I looked at it and I just thought, this world looks extraordinary. It was just beautifully crafted. The story seemed to be, the great thing about where video games have headed over the last 10 years or so is a real attempt to tell stories in a very passionate and an emotional way. And this kind of was the combination of the artwork, the world, the created world, and the story itself. I just thought I'd love to be part of it.
If you're wondering how a little outfit like Sandfall could have squeezed Hollywood talent like Charlie Cox and Andy Serkis into their budget, they didn't have to. When they signed the deal with Kepler, they agreed that getting some A-list voice talent into the game would be good from a marketing perspective, and so Cox and Serkis were paid out of the game's marketing budget, which honestly makes a lot of sense given that these sorts of names do attract people who aren't necessarily paying attention to a strange little JRPG being made by a startup in Montpellier. With that sort of talent on the docket, I imagine that the rest of the voice cast might be a little nervous or intimidated, but if they were, they certainly didn't show it, because every single member of this cast turns in an unbelievable, phenomenal, award-worthy performance, to the point where I expect that when the Game of the Year nominations are announced this year, the entire category will just be the main party of Expedition 33, including Esquier, of course, who I'd put down as a long odds favorite. Just as there is great humanity in the writing, there's also so much humanity in each of the voice performances. They're also delicate in the way that they surface emotion or hold it back. Verso and Mael often feel so raw, almost like emotional floodgates that have been thrown open and you can't but be moved by the performances that Ben Starr and Jennifer English deliver.
What song was that? I feel like I know it.
Yes, an old song I used to play to my sister.
Can you play another?
Sure. We have all night.
And then there's Lune, played by Kirsty Ryder, and Ciel, played by Charla Nix. They're each so guarded and poised in the opening chapters, and the process of chipping away at their emotional armor is so rewarding because under each new layer is a new, subtle, intricate performance from Ryder and Nix.
Wow. We're in the middle of nowhere with 1 year left to live. What better time to build friendships?
I could use some wine, though.
Making friends is thirsty work.
I think it's easy to overlook SKA and Minoko as just the comic relief, but the truth is, I think they're just as strong in their comedic performances as the other actors are in their dramatic performances. Both of them are so funny, and it's really hard to write good comedy, and harder still to deliver it. But Maxence Cazorla as SKA and Rich Kibble as Minoko both understood the assignment perfectly. And as much as we'll remember Expedition 33 for its gut-wrenching reveals, I think we'll also remember it for the fact that one of the main characters had an actual foot fetish, and the other one was, I'm gonna say high? Yeah, I think SK makes a lot more sense if you just imagine that he's high all the time.
I too am. But I'm also wee. So the wee balances the.
The raw talent behind these performances was one thing, but the conditions under which they performed made it much easier for these actors to deliver strong performances, and much of that is owed to how closely Guillaume and Jen were involved during the recording process.
We were in constant dialogue with the people at the top, which doesn't happen a lot of the time. I've not experienced it. Often you go through an intermediary, sorry. And then sometimes you'll get these kind of arbitrary notes that don't seem to make any sense. Whereas when you've got Guillaume there, who's sitting there in the Frenchest way possible, I don't know how to explain it, but he's just so louche, and just like, it's good. And you just want to please him,
Sure.
And Jen, who is this kind of effervescent, incredibly articulate, just ball of life and love, who'd get so excited and give you such kind of visceral feedback to your work, because she is a writer who, I mean, you know the story. She auditioned to be an actor in this and ended up writing the whole thing. We were bringing her words to life, and it was this really cool thing to see that what we were doing was actually having an effect on the people who were making it. And we could tell when we were doing a good job because it's how they imagined it.
The other thing that Ben and Jen remarked of the recording process was how remarkably efficient it was, and that was not typical in the world of video game voice acting.
We recorded so quickly, Ralph. Like, it was literally I think it's the fastest game I've ever done as far as lines per hour.
Yeah.
Right.
It was shitloads.
But it was such a fascinating process, because there's something so incredibly efficient about the decisions that were being made in the room. Often it'll be, we don't know what we want because we're still exploring it. And so that's why it takes a huge amount of time, because of indecision. Whereas this, you turn up and we do something and you go, that one. And he knew exactly what he wanted.
We've touched on it a few times already, but a clear, unshakable vision for the game was one of the reasons that it feels so authored, that it came together so strongly, but also how it came together so efficiently. Because when you know what you want, you don't waste time making things that don't fit into that vision.
Having that strong creative direction really helped have everybody working towards the same goal, and not having people try to steer the project in a way or the other, because that's also where you can spend time doing stuff that's going to be thrown out afterwards. And I think in terms of a good example of that is in terms of the features we have cut from the game, there aren't that many, because we knew what we were going to do, and Guillaume was always pushing towards the vision he had for the game, and he really managed to get everybody on board, including people that were not particularly fond of turn-based game. But when we realized that people within the team were enjoying the game we were making, we knew that we had something that we could work on, and that we had to keep pushing forwards with that particular vision.
When it comes to how emotionally resonant Clair Obscur 33 is, there is one other crucial piece of the puzzle that we haven't talked about yet, and it's the music. Laurie Lorian composed a total of 8 hours of music for this game, and if you've been listening to it on repeat for the past few weeks, as I have, then you would know just how much range there is in this OST. There are moving ballads. There are EDM dance tracks. There's sultry saxophone numbers. There's subtle piano themes. And there's rock ballads that feel like they just went full Linkin Park. But of all these, the most memorable tracks are the various themes that occur and reoccur, especially the character themes. So I asked Lorian what his process was for developing these.
So for example, if it's a character theme, I will really look for a really long time at the concept art of Nicolas. I read like all the script before, and with the script and the concept art and my own sensibility and my own vision of what will be the sound of these characters, I start working on the song.
Yeah, right. So you look at the concept art and you just kind of like feel it based upon that.
Yeah, it was my main point. I really spend a lot of time just be in front of the concept art and let ideas come. And so really often I compose with the concept art on my dual screen, and I see what sound I heard in my mind.
There's a tremendous amount of output from everyone involved in the making of Clair Obscur Expedition 33, but I feel like Lorian's is the most overwhelming in its sheer volume and breadth and intensity. This feels like the output of a man possessed, or at the very least, someone who had finally been given the chance to do what they were clearly born to do.
I'm not so accurate in English, but I see it a bit like a life mission. I have for the first time the chance to write a character team for real characters. I have like the chance to write a final boss team for an RPG. So yeah, it was really like that for me. It will be like my first game, and it will be the first time I can maybe possibly do that. And I don't know if it will be a second time. So yeah, I have like one opportunity right now to create something I wanted for my whole life. So yeah, I need to take it and give my all to it, because I don't know, maybe one day I will die sooner than I expect, or I don't have the chance to compose again. So yeah, it was if I create my soundtrack, I want to do it with my full soul and heart, to have no regrets on it, to really be in peace with what to come, because I know I cannot give more than what I have give here.
Since release, Lorian's music has gone on to reach millions of people, but before he had millions of fans, he had one, and Guillaume's faith in Lorian's music transcended his faith in the very game that they were making.
I always said, even if the game is bad, the music will live its own life and it's going to work, because like I've been listening to the same songs for 5 years straight, and I'm not tired of them, and I still love them, and I still listen to them. So like it's Lorian, yeah, he's a genius.
Guillaume may have been hinting at some shaky nerves there, but the truth is, as launch loomed closer and closer, the team was feeling more and more confident. In 4 years, they had gone from a scrappy prototype to a complete, polished 50-hour JRPG featuring innovative gameplay, an intricate narrative, dozens of hours of brilliant, exquisite voice performances, and 8 hours of some of the best video game music that this generation had served up. The hype cycle had worked a dream, with well-received trailers, some Vidoc-style content, the reveal of the baguette costumes, God bless, and the promise of Day 1 Game Pass was going to make it really easy for people to get their hands on this thing. The 24th of April was also a really nice window to launch, since there weren't any other big titles launching in the same period, or at least no RPGs that might siphon off some of the audience. And it's not like a big, popular RPG is just going to appear out of nowhere and launch in the same week. That would be ridiculous. And I mean, even if it did, it's not like that game's gonna be on Game Pass, right? I mean, surely the people at Microsoft aren't going to suddenly bury this little debut RPG from an indie studio by shadow dropping a remaster of a classic, much-loved Bethesda game just 2 days before Clair Obscur is due to launch, right?
Of course, it's it's a massive game that a lot of people are waiting for. So basically, being a remake, and of course, it's been like 20 years, since I think was it 20 years since the last Oblivion. So yeah, we did have we were a bit concerned, but I think I wouldn't say like sure of ourselves. I think we did have, like you said, like an audience that would have a preference for our game. So I think we were pretty nervous about it. I would lie if I said we didn't. For sure.
To this day, I still do not know what could have possessed Microsoft to sequence their Xbox Game Pass release schedule this way, but ultimately, thankfully, it didn't matter one iota, because after years of blood, sweat, and inspiration, this little team that no one had ever heard of before, full of people who had never made a game before, released a game that not only became the distant frontrunner for Game of the Year 2025, but also one of the highest rated video games of all time.
I absolutely love this game. It is comfortably in the top 20 best games I've ever played.
I think for where I am in my life, that is probably the best video game.
10 out of 10. This is one for the history books, ladies and gentlemen.
This is exactly the type of game I'm looking for.
It stands strong alongside its inspirations.
This game has the gameplay, the characters, the story.
This game is absolutely something special.
Yeah, it's peak.
Easily my game of the year.
This is absolutely one of the best video games I have ever played.
Reviews for Clair Obscur Expedition 33 went up about 5 hours prior to the game's global release, and immediately it was clear that Sandfall had pulled off a once-in-a-generation achievement. The review aggregate site OpenCritic puts it at an average score of 92, which makes it the equal 32nd highest rated game released since the site began tracking scores in 2013. The prestigious Edge magazine awarded the game a perfect 10, the 28th time in that publication's 32-year history that they awarded a perfect score. Reviews from players were equally effusive. On Steam, the title sits at an overwhelmingly positive rating of 96%, and over on Metacritic, Expedition 33 has a 9.7 user score rating, making it the highest user-rated game of all time on that platform. And just as Guillaume predicted, the music of the game would go on to have a life of its own too. It shot up to number 1 on the Billboard Classical charts, it was number 13 on the official soundtrack charts, and it was the 31st most downloaded album in its launch window with over 18 million streams. This sort of critical reception is an easy layup to commercial success, but these days success is measured quite differently when a game is available on a subscription service like Game Pass. In those instances, publishers will often revert to talking about numbers of players reached rather than direct sales, since, 3 million players reached is a more impressive number than 500,000 sales plus 2.5 million people on Game Pass. Sandfall, though, didn't need to do that, because despite the fact that Expedition 33 was available on Game Pass, people were still buying it in droves. On Steam, the game peaked at over 145,000 concurrent players, and within days, Sandfall announced that over 1 million copies had been sold. A week or so later, it was 2 million copies, and then 33 days after release, Sandfall Interactive announced that Expedition 33 had sold 3.3 million copies. You absolutely cannot make this stuff up. With that level of resounding success, you really do have to wonder if Sandfall saw this coming.
I mean, some people always predict kind of crazy stuff, but most of our predictions were way lower than what we actually got. We expected some kind of success because we knew what game we had. We were the first players of the game, and we really loved it. So at that point, when you have a team that loved the game, they expect for it to succeed, but not to the level it had. To be honest, it's like way beyond what we would have expected.
I mean, yeah, as soon as the reviews popped at 11, I mean, I think we never yelled so hard ever. So like, I mean, it was just it was just this sense of relief, just the fact that it was acclaimed. It had universal acclaim in the end, and I mean, we just like everybody was just hugging. It was still kind of mid-morning, so we had like champagnes and croissant and stuff like that. So it was definitely an amazing day, pretty unforgettable.
I haven't fully taken in what's happening. But it was a very big moment for me of it went well, and that's really a beautiful moment in my life, and I think it's something that I should cherish forever. So yeah.
So Clair Obscur Expedition 33 had achieved instant, overwhelming critical and commercial success, far beyond even the wildest and most hopeful ambitions of the people that made it, and that is obviously a huge achievement. But in the days that followed, something even more remarkable happened. Cosplayers started popping up. Fan art began to surface. People started making memes poking fun at how bullshit some of these combat animation wind-ups were.
Man, this some bullshit. What am I supposed to react to? Nobody winds up like that.
People made some beautiful, heartfelt covers of the game's music. While others had a little bit more fun with the soundtrack. Point is, soon after launch, Expedition 33 crossed that impossible threshold where something goes from being the possession of the people who made it to being something that lives in other people's hearts.
So for us, I'd say that the most surprising is not even for us the sales or the success, but it's how much the game resonates with people and really makes them feel. I mean, it's a sad game, but it makes them feel very good.
Right.
So it's really like the emotional response to the game that blows us away, like even more than, because like even sales is just numbers. So we're very happy to have them, but it's really like we make video games to give people a sense of joy and wonder and excitement, and the fact that it worked so well for us, it's the most beautiful reward.
You can understand a game's going to be big, but this game isn't big. It's special.
No.
And I think that's it. It's like, you know, you've mentioned before about Nier Automata. That game isn't big. It's special. And it has an emotional resonance that far outweighs the commercial impact. The commercial impact is great, but the emotional impact that has is so far-reaching. People are so moved by that piece of art. And I remember I said to you, Ralph, I remember watching your review of that game. And I think this game has a similar resonance in that way, that this game is going to last for a very long time because of how emotionally impactful it was. It stays with you. I said in interviews before we started this that I hope that this game stays with people for a very, very long time. I hope it imprints on them in the same way that those games when I was 8, 9 or 10 imprinted on me.
Message said head north to the weird corridors.
Let's carve a path. At the start of this video, I said that there's a temptation to reach for the easy answers when it comes to the question of how Sandfall managed to pull this off. Just do this, just do that. It's easy if you follow Sandfall's simple 3-step process. I'm fortunate enough to be able to speak to many game makers, and the honest truth is that many of them have the same ambitions that Guillaume and his team did. They too have small, agile teams filled with talented people. They too have a clear vision for what they want to create, and they too have a publisher willing to back them on that journey. I'd even go as far as to say that a lot of the story behind the making of Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is actually quite typical, and right now a similar version of this story is playing out at dozens of other small indie teams that you've never heard of, but one day might. Having said all of that, there were some things about the making of Expedition 33 that were decidedly atypical, and the compounding of those things took what should have been a good team and made them truly great, and it took what should have been a really fantastic video game and made it an instant classic, just an overnight all-timer. What then were those things that allowed Sandfall to achieve such an outsized level of success, or at the very least, what were the things they did that could be replicated elsewhere by other game makers? Well, I think the starting point is that thing that Larian boss Sven Vincke mentioned in his Game of the Year speech last year. The team were making a game that they truly wanted to make.
We are basically making the game that we want to play, and I think it's as simple as that. It's really like the key ingredient. It's like, even today, like in the team, we are still playing the game and discovering new builds and trying some speedruns, and like we are having so much fun with it. And I think that when you listen to many developers, they are kind of tired after working on their game, and we are not. We just enjoy it so much.
Guillaume's vision was the cornerstone for this entire project, and every single person I interviewed said that one of the biggest reasons why Expedition 33 came together as well as it did, and why it was such a massive success, a lot of it was because of Guillaume's clear vision. It gave the team the clarity to work on only what was needed, almost completely removing the need for costly and time-wasting redesigning and reworking. It made the recording process the most efficient that the voice actors had ever been involved with, since both Guillaume and Jen were so clear with what they wanted and what they didn't. For us as players, it made Expedition 33 feel so contiguous and artisanal and authored. So many games we play feel like they're designed by committee because, well, very often they are. Teams working on AAA games are just too big, and having some experience with that himself, Guillaume was really protective of his vision and his ability to communicate it to his team.
When you have like 1,000 people in a team, how do you keep a creative vision? Like I will have absolutely no idea how to keep a creative vision in a team of 1,000 people. Even like on our side, when we grew to 30 people from a much smaller team, there were a lot of hardships and things that we had to reorganize just to make sure that we keep the vision, because it was kind of going astray a little bit.
But Guillaume was by no means a dictator, and the way that he was able to achieve his dream was by assembling a team of people that he trusted. And the way he did that was twofold. One, they set a really high bar for the talent they wanted to recruit, and two, and this is where Sandfall were really out there, the lens through which they viewed talent wasn't about experience or CV line items. They hired people who had never professionally done the thing they were being hired to do because they could just sense their raw talent. In an industry where we're constantly reporting on veteran developers leaving to form new studios, along comes this group of upstarts and graduates, and they just blow everyone away. It strikes me that this is probably the most remarkable aspect of the Expedition 33 story, but also the one where Guillaume admits that luck played the greatest role. Like, how many composers like Lorien do you imagine are just laying around out there? And do you mean to tell me that the universe wasn't conspiring just a little bit when it connected these two people on a random indie gaming forum that they had both never been to? Come on now. Far easier to recreate is the leveraging of modern game-making technology, which I know is kind of a boring, less inspiring bullet point in this list, but the genesis of this entire project really was Guillaume messing around in Unreal Engine and realizing what he could do with it. Both Tom and Guillaume have spoken often about the fact that a game like this just couldn't exist as little as 5 years ago because Unreal Engine 5 makes it so easy to deliver these cutting-edge visuals. Then there's stuff like facial capture, motion capture, lighting, things that were so time-consuming and or expensive to implement in the past, but now a small team on a shoestring budget can produce the sorts of in-game visuals and cinematic cutscenes that would be the work of hundreds of AAA developers in times past. There is a generational step that has happened with Unreal Engine 5, and it's given small teams the ability to punch well above their weight. Sandfall seemed to have been one of the first studios to really figure this out, and it'll be really interesting to see how many other studios follow in their footsteps. For me, personally, when I think about why Expedition 33 affected me as much as it did, I do think about the fact that it really seemed to respect my intelligence where many other games don't. I think you can feel it in its gameplay, a deep, complex set of classes, weapons, pictos, and luminas that reward your exploration and curiosity when build crafting. There's no minimap to guide you, no quest log, no checklist of things to tick off, no bloat, which I think is actually one of the highest compliments that a game can pay to its player. More than anything though, Clair Obscur 33 trusted me to pay attention to the story it was telling and to engage the characters that were its centerpiece. Things were left unsaid and unexplained, and into those gaps I poured my own thoughts, my own theories, my own emotions. Expedition 33 earnestly wore its heart on its sleeve, and in its own way, it asked me to do the same. But above all else, I think Clair Obscur Expedition 33 was a game that had humanity at its core. And it's so funny because at the very start of this process of reviewing this game, which, would eventually sprawl into this video, the starting point for all of that was just me reflecting on how profoundly human this experience felt. It was coursing with this delicate, volatile, effervescent humanity, such that no matter which part of it you touched, you could feel the human hand of the person who wrote that thing, or designed that thing, or drew that thing, or composed that thing. So it was rather unbelievable to me that at the very end of this process in my final interview with Guillaume, that he concluded our time together with this, when I asked him why he thought Expedition 33 had managed to resonate with people in a way that so few games are able to achieve.
But on my side, I think that maybe something that was lost a bit in all these big productions is honesty and truth and joy, like just the joy of making games, basically. Because when you look at older games, you could feel the team behind it, and you could feel the team trying to talk to you, and like, very silly challenges, like for example the gestural beaches, or the gross dead boss, which is dumb and electricity bounces like 1,000 times on you. Like, I really love this kind of things in game, because you can feel the team having fun with you, and you want to have fun with the team. And I think it's very much this human aspect of projects that lack in big games, where everything has to be like sanitized and just make sure that you don't lose any players at any point, because the risk will be too high. And on our side, we just this boss is going to bounce on you 200 times, and it's fun, and people will be pissed off, but it's fun. So yeah, and there was no, like, in a big meeting, in a big company, this would have been absolute no. But here it was not even a discussion. It was just, yeah, it's fun. So yeah, I think it's really the sense of joy and honesty in a game, and the humanity also, I think, is super important. And it can be either very serious, like we have some very serious themes in the game that are very much personal and human, but we also have the silliness, which is also like a big part of just how we work at Zenless, that we don't take ourselves seriously, as I was saying. So yeah, that would be my analysis. I think people are just feeling, even if it's not the words they use, just the lack of humanity and fun and relationship with the team behind the game, let's say.
That is a fucking good answer, my man. I tell you what. That right there is a really great answer. We can look at all the things that made Clair Obscur Expedition 33 so special, but the truth is, much like a human being, it's not a template. It's just its own individual thing, and that's what I came to appreciate most as I went through the process of trying to understand how it was made. There is no Expedition 33 shake and bake. There is no PowerPoint that you can show at the next boardroom meeting. There is no TED Talk or LinkedIn post or any other ghastly corporate thing. It's art made by people who wanted to make a thing because they wanted to make it and because no one else was making it. And even though they never made anything like it before, they trusted that they could do it. And they did. If there's anything to be taken away from the story of how this was made, it isn't the process, it's the spirit of it all. It's the spirit that moves you to pick up a pencil and start drawing, or an instrument and start playing, to open that laptop to write, or even to accidentally make a 2-hour-long documentary when all you were shooting for was a snappy 15-minute review. Clair Obscur Expedition 33's story is about art and grief, but its impact and legacy is ultimately one of joy, as millions of people experience this and are moved by it. What a thing for this little team in Montpellier to have accomplished. When I was interviewing the team, I asked each of them if they were all nervous about the pressure that might be on them as they think about what's next for the studio. How on earth could you top what you've done here in Expedition 33? But rather than be nervous about the challenge, most of them said to me something along the lines of, well, we didn't really know how to make a game the first time we did it, so imagine what we could do now that we actually know what we're doing. And to that I say, that's the spirit. Hey, let me ask you, are you looking to upgrade your keyboard, mouse, headset, or maybe even pick up a new pair of all-purpose gaming-compatible earbuds? If you are, then look no further than this video's sponsor, SteelSeries. SteelSeries products are industry-leading. You don't have to take my word for it. Go look up reviews and you'll see that in every category, from mice to keyboards to headsets and beyond, SteelSeries stuff racks up awards left, right, and center. With a mix of functionality, quality, and reliability, SteelSeries has cemented an enviable reputation, and I'm very proud to have them as a channel partner. SteelSeries never rest on their laurels though, meaning they're always updating and improving their lineup while also making waves in all new categories. The biggest recent release was their Arctis Nova earbuds. I've been using these since they dropped and I absolutely love them. The best thing about them is that they're a pair of earbuds that can work with pretty much any device, including a PS5 console. That's because it has a dedicated 2.4 GHz dongle which massively expands its compatibility, but also its reliability in gaming scenarios. You don't have to use that though, since it also has Bluetooth, but you can actually use these two connection types at the same time, switching seamlessly between gameplay and voice calls on your phone by having your earbuds connected to two devices at once. Combined with great ergonomics, fantastic battery, noise cancellation technology, and premium sound, the Arctis earbuds have made a really big splash and are getting excellent reviews all around. SteelSeries also recently refreshed their flagship keyboard. The Apex Pro TKL Gen 3 is genuinely the best keyboard I have ever used. You don't understand how good it feels until you experience it for yourself. The key presses feel like nothing else, while also delivering the fastest actuation response time of any keyboard on the market. It is literally the world's fastest keyboard. No joke. I love it. Outside of that, there's always SteelSeries' award-winning Arctis Nova Pro wireless headset, and that is the best gaming headset money can buy. You see the theme here, right? Whatever category SteelSeries enters, they crush it. And like I said, please don't take my word for it. Go and look at reviews for this stuff. You will see what I mean. Best of all, they're offering any viewer of this channel a special 12% discount when you use offer code SKILLUP at checkout. That's steelseries.com for 12% off when you use offer code SKILLUP at checkout. No strings attached. Thanks very much to SteelSeries for sponsoring the video, and a big thanks to you for watching it.